Andrea is the director of Italian programs at the Wine Scholar Guild, which is an organization dedicated to advanced wine education. She's also a Master of Wine candidate, which reflects her really deep expertise and commitment to wine education. In this episode, what we're really excited to learn from Andrea, first, the tension between drop in wine consumption, but the rise in curiosity. So we may see consumption softening, but the interest in learning about wine, particularly among younger and globally minded consumers, is growing. So we'll explore what this shift says about how people want to engage with wine today. Number two, how to make trade education a really powerful resource. So how can we use wine education to help professionals invite customers into the category, but not overwhelm or intimidate customers? And number three, translating Italian wine for American audiences. So let's dive right in. Welcome to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the U.S. by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the U.S. market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the U.S. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Masterclass U.S. Wine Market. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Andrea Eby to the show. Andrea is the director of Italian programs at the Wine Scholar Guild, which is an organization dedicated to advanced wine education. In this role, Andrea oversees the development and the delivery of the Italian Wine Scholar program, which is comprehensive certification focused on Italy's wine regions, grape varieties, and DOCG systems. She's also a Master of Wine candidate, which reflects her really deep expertise and commitment to wine education. She brings a strong background in both academic wine studies and practical industry experience, and she's recognized for her thoughtful, clear approach to teaching complex topics like Italian wine. So welcome, Andrea, to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for asking me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into today's discussion, Andrea, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to work in the wine business?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I started my professional career as an educator in the public school system here in Canada and taught various grades through kindergarten through grade 9, I guess, before I transitioned into being a special educator. So really focusing on children that were having learning difficulties and supporting their teachers in the classroom in kind of helping them progress as much as possible. And I really loved that career. But once I had my own children, I decided that, I really kind of wanted to have enough energy to devote to my own children. When I was spending my entire day working with small children and then coming home to my own children, I need to have some balance in my life. So at that point, I started really kind of seriously pursuing a career in the wine industry and transitioned into teaching WSET courses and working as a buyer for a store here in Winnipeg.
I love the notion that you found a career in wine through seeking balance. Such a nice thought in these times. Well, as I mentioned, not only is Andrea deeply involved in creating curriculum that brings regional specificity, cultural context, academic rigor to wine education, she also has a deep personal commitment to the study of wine herself. So in this episode, what we're really excited to learn from Andrea, our 3 key takeaways are, first, the tension between drop in wine consumption, but the rise in curiosity. So we may see consumption softening, but the interest in learning about wine, particularly among younger and globally minded consumers, is growing. So we'll explore what this shift says about how people want to engage with wine today. Number 2, how to make trade education a really powerful resource. So how can we use wine education to help professionals invite customers into the category, but not overwhelm or intimidate customers? And number 3, translating Italian wine for American audiences. So as we said, it's complex, it can feel daunting, but education has the power to make it not only accessible, but kind of magnetic. So you'll have some really great insights for us, Andrea, and we're really excited to talk about all this with you. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, let's talk.
So first, as we said, the tension between the drop in consumption, but the rise in curiosity. So with this dip in U.S. wine consumption that we're seeing, not just in the U.S., globally, we're seeing this drop. Why do you think wine education programs are still thriving? What is really driving this, do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple different things that are probably contributing to this. I think we can look at, how the numbers kind of are really supporting this idea that although we see this drop in some parts of the industry, we do see a rise in people that are interested in pursuing education focused on wine. And I think there's a lot of maybe psychology behind why people are seeking this out at this time. I think it's more than just looking for qualifications. There's some deep things that are driving us to take this path. I will say that, actually, before you even reached out to me to talk about this topic, I was last week listening to a podcast that you're probably familiar with, A Question of Drinks, which is hosted by Luli Halstead and Felicity Carter. And they were actually discussing some of these very issues. And so I apologize to both of them if I kind of riff off of some of the themes that they were discussing, but I think that, they're really salient points, and they do resonate with me in terms of why people are pursuing education at this time. I think that our preference in food and in drinking and in what we choose to drink, all of these things aren't just surface level. They're really shaped by a lot of cultural factors, emotional factors, and also how we want to be perceived in the world. And so, when we think about things like cultural capital, so if I think of my parents' generation, people at that point that were sort of deemed cultured or intellectuals or, very sophisticated, they had a lot of really deep knowledge about things like classical music and art, literature, classical literature, that sort of thing. Today, I think it's maybe a little different. Now there's a lot of cultural capital put on, the people that know the difference between their Brunello and their Barolo, right? And so wine and food have really come to be sort of a form of sort of modern social literacy in a way. And I think that, part of that boom in wine education reflects that, partially due to that sort of shift in what we deem as significant culturally. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting. So would you say that you're seeing, because you said it's not about qualifications anymore. So are people really seeking this education for pleasure? Like they don't intend to necessarily do anything with it?
Well, and I think, yeah, when you look at the numbers, that really does kind of support that view. The latest figures I could find from WSET were that about 54% of their students don't even work in the wine trade. So these are people that are just passionate consumers of wine and are looking to, that's not to say that some of them maybe aren't aspirational about working in wine at some point, but that at the point that they're taking these courses, that at least half of them are not involved in the trade. And at Wine Scholar Guild, we could say that that is about roughly the same breakdown in terms of the demographics as well. So we see there that, yeah, at least half of our students are really just interested in learning more about wine for other reasons. So, it's not just about advancing your place at work. It's obviously there's other motivations, other things that are fueling that desire.
Also because, kind of like the rise of the experience economy becomes part of an experience. Like you can maybe take the experience in more fully if you go to a beautiful wine tasting somewhere in Italy and you have, a solid knowledge base. Is there some correlation there?
100%, I think. I mean, I would say that that is one huge advantage that Italy has is that, I will say Americans, but I won't limit it to Americans because I know many Canadians who are
North
also,
Americans.
yes, North Americans who are, almost to the point of being obsessed with Italian culture, right? And, I'm a member of several sort of Facebook groups that are completely just focused on preparing for that once in a lifetime trip to Italy. It's like what you should wear and what you shouldn't wear so you don't look like a tourist, and where you should eat, and avoiding this and making sure that you look like a local by doing this. And people are just like really want to experience that Italian culture. And unfortunately, not all of us are able to travel to Italy to live out that experience. But I think as an industry, we can kind of do a really important part and serve a role in bringing those kind of micro experiences to people here in North America without having them to travel somewhere. I think it, also kind of relating back to that sort of cultural piece in it too, and that social kind of aspect, like as you mentioned, nowadays you don't necessarily need to be an expert on something in the traditional sense in order to have a lot of influence in a certain industry. Or, if we look at something like Instagram, there's lots of people out there who are influencing people's buying decisions without having necessarily their WSET diploma. But there's obviously something there that's resonating with consumers, that they are looking to these people to kind of be their educators as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you see such an affinity for the Italian way of life. I agree with you. I mean, we might be biased, but I'm hard pressed to think of another country in the world that has been able to export culture like Italy has. I mean, everyone in the world has some idea. If you say Italy, they'll think of something that relates back to Italian culture. But do you see that since at Wine Scholar Guild, you separate your courses by country? So do you see more interest in the Italian courses over the other ones?
It's interesting. I haven't got the statistics on it, that I could say explicitly this is what happens. But historically, a lot of people would have started with the French wine scholar. And that was probably because at the time when the company was just sort of developing, first of all, it was the only country that we were focused on. But secondly, I think that France was really seen as maybe that gateway into a career in wine. If you had some certification in France, then you clearly had an idea what wine was about. You had this real training in the classics of wine. Nowadays, I see a lot of people that are going straight into our programs and choosing Italy as their kind of entry point into Wine Scholar Guild. And I think it does relate back to that. We have a very active community forum center online. And last time I checked, we have, I think, over 4,500 active community members on there. And those people are, if you watch the forums, like a lot of them are looking for advice on where to visit, what restaurants to eat in, what wineries to connect with. And when I'm teaching my classes, I get a ton of questions about those sort of things too, and people wanting to know, what would I drink if I had a choice of these particular bottles from this particular region? So yeah, I do see that kind of cultural affinity is driving people towards Italian focused courses at Wine Scholar Guild.
So, Italian Fate Agency, you're doing a great job.
Yes.
Let's shift a little bit to talk about, trade education as a powerful resource because, I don't want to generalize, but I think consumers have not often, but definitely maybe had an experience where they've felt alienated by somebody who has more wine education than they do. So, one of the tensions is really how can we use this deep knowledge that we're asking trade industry people to acquire as a bridge instead of a barrier?
I don't think this is just specific to wine. I think this is if you are an educator, you're always asking yourself this question, right? You're always asking, how can I convey this information so that people, one, understand it, two, can begin to sort of analyze it and use the information that you are giving them, right? And I think it's really important to look at kind of where people are coming to you, at what level they're coming to you. And, I think that the trade organizations really need to make sure that they are kind of structuring their educational content in a way that whatever level that consumer is at, they find somewhere that they can access that information that's at their level. I'm sure both of us have been part of sort of trade related educational activities that are extremely high level, that are really focused on the minutia of, maps and regulations and this sort of thing. And that will appeal to a small portion of the consumer base. It's a very small portion. And so looking at, I think a lot of trade organizations do a lot of sort of like top down education where they're trying to train the trainers and hoping that, sommeliers and buyers and that sort of thing and journalists will go out and help educate about their regions or their wines. But I think that it's really important to, if that's your strategy, to give those people some strategies of their own to then how do you connect with consumers at the table in your restaurant? How do you convey this information in an accessible way for people? Because sommeliers and buyers, they aren't educators. Their skill set lies in a different sort of area. And so it's important, if you are relying on those individuals to be your kind of messengers, that you also build in some education about how to educate people in a way, and just don't expect that people will know and have those skills to kind of convey your message. I think in terms of Italian wine, you know, it's a very complex, it seems very intimidating from the outside, but I think with the right kind of framing, we can like transform that complexity into more like curiosity. And you don't have to learn all of it in one session, right? It's like giving people little bits that they can sort of connect with and encourage their curiosity, so they want to come back and learn more.
We think about even, the attention span that maybe social media has created is like people have like 15 to 60-second attention spans, but maybe that's something that we can translate into real life for these complex issues. Because when somebody's sitting at your table at a restaurant, they probably don't want, PowerPoint slides, but those kind of like, quick, really interesting tidbits of something that they can grab onto a little bit more.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I find personally, like, if I have a chance to tell people, some stories and help them connect with the wine and the people that make it, people really want to try those wines. If I tell people about Andrea Polidoro, who is trying to revive these old Vite Meritate vines in the, remote village high in the Sibillini Mountains, people are like, get me this wine. I want to try this wine, right? I want to try the wine. I want to support the person who is devoting themselves to this cause. And it's just, I don't even have to talk about what the wine tastes like. It's
Yeah.
kind of irrelevant at that point. People are just so engaged and sort of invested in the story that they want to learn more. And they're asking you the questions. You're not shoving information down their throats. They're asking you to tell them more.
Such a great way to look at it because, it's important for somebody who's selling a consumer bottle of wine to kind of be able to extrapolate what they're saying their taste preferences are. But also, taste is so subjective that, it's hard for somebody to say, hey, I really like a wine that has great acid. And then you give them a Chablis and they're like, what is this? This is way too much, So I think
Yeah.
getting the consumer to connect in that way is so like, and those are details you will never forget. Like, hearing about, I think often of Tabarini in the hills of Montefalco, who like walks around his vineyard with his dog perched on his shoulder, smoking a cigarette, like looking over his vines. Like people will not forget something like that, even if they can't fully communicate, the flavors of Sagrantino and, what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the trade organizations, as I said before, unfortunately, we all can't just like transport our consumers to Italy and give them this amazing, immersive 1 week experience. But I think that, the trade organizations can make sure that when they're developing these programs, that they're really carefully looking at, okay, what's the information that's already out there? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, if there's good information, be it through Wine Scholar Guild or WSCT, like, working together with some of these organizations to use that existing, those existing resources, and then really kind of using the budget, the resources that they have to, like you say, kind of give people some unforgettable experiences. And if that's, sending somebody to Montefalco and filming him with his dog and doing a little interview, right? And giving people maybe a chance while they're in the class to kind of have a live kind of interaction with him, even if it's just via video. I think people will remember that, right? And then when that opportunity comes up to talk about Sagrantino, that's what they're going to talk about, not the fact that it's incredibly tannic and blah, 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 right? People, like you say, people, they remember those things. So making sure that we're building in some of those opportunities into the trade kind of based education, I think is important.
And we have no shortness of phenomenal characters in the wine industry.
No,
So yeah,
no.
they're there. They're there. And like you said, just all of the other kind of groups that work with brands to bring their wines to wherever they are in the world. Yeah, we need to incorporate that more.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as we talk a little bit about bringing Italian wine to American audiences, so we said notoriously complex, hundreds of grapes, countless appellations, and you already touched a little bit on, using maybe stories more than the details of the wine itself. But what are some interesting ways maybe that you could think of to approach translating the feeling more, the culture, the place for an American audience? And we can say North American.
Well, actually, that's one of the reasons that we developed the Italian Wine Essentials program at Wine Scholar Guild as well, because the Italian Wine Scholar program is, as you mentioned before, very kind of like focused on making sure that people have the access to almost every detail possible about Italian wine. And that can be really overwhelming for somebody who is just kind of considering, maybe I want to learn a little bit more about Italian wine. And so when we developed Italian Wine Essentials, we really were thinking about, people who own Italian restaurants and want to train their staff, in the basics of Italian wine, people who are thinking of going to Italy for that first trip, agencies that are representing Italian wines that want to train their staff kind of in that sort of basic kind of like fluency of what is Italian wine, how does it work, what are the kind of most culturally and commercially significant wines, grapes, appellations, that sort of things, without being overwhelmed. But at the same time, we didn't just want to dump a whole bunch of information into a book. We wanted to try and give it some color and to really weave in a lot of those kind of cultural pieces. So we, on the page where we talk about, for instance, Brunello di Montalcino, we also have like a little sidebar that talks about visiting Sant'Antimo and, really kind of drinking in some of the sites and sort of not always tourist things that are in the region, but also the food, the traditional foods of that region. What are they? Are they historically paired with the wines that we're talking about? And so trying to really give people other things besides kind of foreign grape names to try and remember, and to like sort of hook their knowledge onto things that maybe they can connect to a little easier. I think that's important. It's like if you're working with people from different cultures and different backgrounds, thinking about what are the kind of entry points in terms of like cultural similarities or food that you can talk about, the sort of different structural elements of food, and relate that to Italian food, and just kind of give people, again, places where they can connect and make those connections themselves and then start extrapolating upon those things. And I think that's where the story thing is really important, because somebody who doesn't feel like they're an expert about wine, it's really intimidating to go and share kind of, this very technical information with, other staff members. If you're the kind of beverage manager and now you're responsible for training people that are working with you, it's really hard to seeing yourself as that expert initially. But it's much easier to like I say, share the stories with those people and talk about wine in this less technical kind of way. I really think it's important too that when people are developing certification courses or training courses, or they're thinking about how to like promote their brand or agency, that you really remain authentic, because especially with, I think, the younger generation, they have become experts at seeing what is fake and who is kind of posing on things, and just really being true to your identity and trying to promote that, and being honest with people that if you are an agency that, let's say, doesn't specialize in representing low intervention wines, but you see that a lot of younger consumers are really connecting with that kind of philosophy, and it's more about connecting with a philosophy and supporting that sort of lifestyle than it is necessarily about how something tastes. But if you see that, instead of trying to like promote yourself as a agency that maybe you have one low intervention
Yeah.
wine and you start promoting yourself as this low intervention specialist, no, instead take a step back and think, how can we capitalize on the fact I don't know a lot about this? Maybe I can share my kind of journey into learning about this whole other side of the industry in this world. And I think people will appreciate the fact that you're being a little bit vulnerable and showcasing your curiosity and, your company's curiosity to learn about things. And I think, we don't all have to know everything about everything, and people appreciate watching people try to, understand new things and to kind of incorporate those things into their life, their business, etc.
I think that's such a great comment for the people that maybe are intimidated about wine. It's like, you're not here to know everything about everything. What it sounds like you guys are doing a really good job at with your programs is really kind of facilitating the wine curious to become even more curious. Like, it feels like sometimes wine education is like very technical, like know this, know this, know this, it's this terpene and blah, blah, blah. But like you said, that's really hard for somebody that doesn't like really, really love wine and science to comprehend. But you're helping them to kind of take knowledge in ways that is less memorization and more really absorption.
I mean, I do see in our industry too, sometimes maybe a little backlash against like formalized wine education. I notice that, on social media and this kind of thing every once in a while. And while I see where that's coming from, I kind of think, how can I think about this from a personal perspective? And, I kind of think of it as, I want my doctor to know everything there is about being a doctor. Do I want them to speak to me like they're at medical school? No, I want them to be able to, speak to me in a way that I can relate to and give me the amount of information that I need to make decisions, to advocate for myself, that sort of thing. But I still want them to know a heck of a lot about medicine.
Yes.
And I kind of think that, it's our job as educators. Yes, we're in this position because we were probably very curious and still are very curious about all aspects of wine. And I think that's a good thing. It's like, it's just our curiosity took us down this very, very sort of, long path that has no end, because every year it's a new vintage and every year you're learning things again, but it's a very fulfilling kind of path to follow. And it's just sort of thinking as that educator, like I mentioned before, how can I be relatable to people? And, really also asking people a lot of questions, like, and not about wine, but about, why do you want to learn about wine? What is it that really kind of fascinates you about wine? Trying to get to know your students, your consumer base that you're really trying to influence in some way, and kind of tailoring your education around where you're hoping to, you don't need to necessarily get those people to the end of the road, but it's like thinking 6 months from now, where would I hope these people would be? And what steps do I need to take to get them there? And then 6 months later, okay, we're here now.
Yeah.
What's the next kind of journey that we're kind of hoping to lead people on?
I think what is so exciting, right, about wine education at the moment is that, especially when we talk about Italian wine education, like there is so much more access now than there was once before, thanks to people like you and Vinitaly International. And so hopefully that ability to be the bridge is expanding in the market because the quality of education is also expanding.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up Vinitaly International. I think, that program really serves as a great example for what a program can do in terms of building community. And I think if we look kind of back to the beginning of our conversation about, like, why do people do this? Why do they put themselves through these rigorous courses? Why am I subjecting myself to the Master of Wine
Yeah.
program, right? It's a question I ask myself. But if you think about why people are doing these things, a lot of it, I think, can be led back to sort of like, our sort of hierarchy of needs. And once you get past having your basic needs met, then you really start looking for friendship, community, these sort of higher level needs. And these programs can really help provide those for people. It can be this community of people that you belong to, that you really share these interests with. Even if you move further up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very top, we have like self-actualization, right? This is what as a human, you're like working towards that sort of self-actualization. And I think that wine education is, for some people, a way that really kind of connect with on a path towards these things. Yeah, Vinitaly International has done a great job of fostering that community. And I think it's something that trade organizations can definitely learn from, is like, how do you create experiences that help people become sort of loyal to your brand, to your consortio, let's say to the wines that come from there? And how does that sort of loyalty translate into them being sort of the best advocates out in the public for your wines?
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, we're both very proud Italian wine ambassadors, but
Yes.
Vinitaly International is, and Stevie and her team and all their work has done an amazing job at making this a place for like minded individuals to not only just get more educated, but get closer to one another through these Italian wine experience.
Yeah, and I think we've all benefited from knowing one another in terms of, personal experiences where we can recommend, which wineries to visit and give contacts to,
Yeah.
to each other for that sort of thing. And I see that same sort of kind of need for community when I look, as I mentioned about us at Wine Scholar Guild having this community platform, and people are really looking for authentic ways to connect
Yeah.
with other people. And probably since COVID, this is a need that has been sort of, for a lot of people, a more difficult to meet, that kind of basic need of belonging to a community. And I think, yeah, wine education has the potential to really play an important part in that.
Great plug for Wine Scholar Guild, for the Vinitaly International course.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we start to wind down, we like to wrap up here at Masterclass US Wine Market with a rapid fire quiz where we ask our guests 3 questions to help our listeners better understand the US market and specifically this episode. So answer kind of in as short of sentences as you can. Number
Okay.
1, what is your top insight into wine education in the US? And again, we can say North America.
Okay. I will say I had trouble printing out the the notes, so you might need to do this for my printer jammed, and I was like, I can't get this out. So I didn't have a lot of time to think about these. But my number one insight into wine education in the US, I think it is to make sure that you are really looking at where your consumer or your student is in terms of their wine knowledge, and making sure that you are creating educational content that's at their level and kind of just taking them a little step above that, not pushing them too far. Always remembering that people want to feel smart. People want to feel like they are valued. And when you put too much in front of people, it makes them feel sort of incapable of mastering all of that information.
Practical advice, small, digestible chunks of information.
Yes.
Yeah. What is something you would have told your younger professional self about working in wine?
Oh, I probably would have told my younger professional self that to do the certifications earlier. Because I do think that, it's not 100% necessary to have a career in wine to have those certifications, but it absolutely helps. And, while I have the passion and the energy to really go for those things early on.
Another good piece of very practical advice. All right. Another more practical question. We move around a lot in the wine industry. I'm not complaining, but it does mean that we're on the road a lot. So, what is your favorite travel hack when you're doing market work?
Oh my gosh. Travel hack. What are some things that people have said in the past?
People often say things like only travel with a carry-on or bring herbal tea with you or download Google Maps offline. So if you don't have service, like you're still able.
Right. Okay. Okay. I would say that my number one travel hack is that as much as I have tried for many years to become a carry on only person, I have now resigned myself to the fact I will never be that person. However, I have learned to rarely ever pack heels when you are traveling because especially in Italy, you're always regretting that decision. But I would say my number one hack is, yes, I do want to keep my luggage down to as much of a minimum as possible. And so I do bring the little kind of laundry sheet, the paper sheets with
Yeah.
me, and do capitalize on doing laundry along the way as I go, because otherwise, yeah, you end up with nothing to wear in a week or two. So
That is great advice. And yeah, they do make laundry soap in just like these perfect sheets now. It's
yes,
so
so much
easy.
easier, right?
Yeah.
I cut them into the little squares because sometimes you only have a sink,
Yeah.
or in worst case, bidet that you need to do your laundry. So those little cut-up sheets can come in handy, and you don't have to worry about them exploding in your luggage. So
fantastic. That is great advice. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us today on Masterclass US Wine Market. This really has been an amazing look at education, and you have so much going on in the middle of studying for your next MW exam. So we appreciate it so much. How can our listeners connect with you?
You can check out my website, which is www.vinsanity.ca, and you can see that I do teach WSET courses and Wine Scholar Guild courses here in Winnipeg, but I also do work with Italian wineries in particular, finding them representation in the Canadian market. Seems a little complicated from the kind of outside, and so I help people sort of navigate that side of things. And you can follow me on Instagram at Andrea Elizabeth Eby. And yeah, I'm happy to connect with any of our listeners. And if they have questions, please just let me know.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. I really hope we get to bump into each other soon, maybe in November in Verona.
I hope so.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Barbara.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo!